Okay, so thank you all for coming. I know now all of you. So my name is Kevin Geiger, and I'm a senior planner with the Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission. We are filming this tonight because we're going to put it on our YouTube channel and things like that. And that way, should your members and other people you know want to watch this on odd hours, they can tune in and watch this later. So what we're here to do tonight primarily is talk about why housing is important to towns and two ways in the plans and bylaws area that towns can work on furthering housing. And then Ted Wimpey from CVOEO is going to talk about fair housing as well. Oh, and I put the clicker so I can just zap this. Again, that's me, Kevin Geiger there, and you can mainly reach me by email, but if you just Google TRORC, you'll be able to find us. And we're the Regional Planning Commission. I'm always told to say who you are because people are, what is this thing? So we're the Regional Planning Agency for this part of Vermont. We cover most of Windsor, northern Windsor County, southern Orange County, a little bit of Rutland and Addison counties. So we go from Granville to Newbury to down to Hartland over to Plymouth. So that 30-town area there. And we assist towns on all sorts of things, amongst them planning and zoning and land use. But economic development, emergency management, transportation, you name it. So here, setting the stage. Oh, I don't have any notes, so I'll just, that's okay. Have to remember notes. So setting the stage, so when you want to begin to talk about housing, to me, it's helpful to bring it down to the particulars of your town. So instead of just kind of, we need some amorphous housing for some amorphous people out there, try to make it meaningful to the town. And so if you can have a person, like we need housing for this person literally right here that we're talking about, or at least talk about jobs that are important. So we want housing for our plow drivers, because when the roads go bad like they did this morning, you don't want the plow driver to have to get up and drive an hour to your town. You want to be in the town and knowing, oh, the roads are going, so they can go there. So plow drivers, school teachers, police officers, you name it. A bunch of people who are not making zillions of dollars a year, and you want them as valued parts of your community. So think about those people as the people that you're looking for. A lot of the people you're looking for are people who already live in your town, or who already work in your town and wish they could live in your town. So they're your friends, they're your neighbors, they're people you meet out there, but they are either commuting a long distance or they're spending way too much money on their housing situation. And HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, says you shouldn't spend more than 30% of your income on housing and another 15% on transportation. We have a lot of people in our region spending over 50% of their income on housing and transportation combined. And in fact, for a lot of our region, it looks like you're probably spending nearly as much on transportation as you are in housing for lots of folks. And that's assuming that, you know, we charge federal rates for your use of the car. And cars seem cheap, you know, on a day-to-day basis because you're just putting in gas or something, but they actually have a huge cost. What kind of homes do people need? This is a slightly dated graphic because that's running off of 2010 census, but that's comparing, this is our region, and we're right here now, and this is comparing the year 2000 to the year 2010 and the percent change in housing. And so you can see up in Hancock, they actually lost some housing a little bit. But then the lighter colors, the town I live in, Pomfret, gained very little housing. The little slightly less blue gained some housing, but the darker blue gained the most. And interestingly enough, if you look at our towns and you see Bethel, and you see Randolph, and you see Hartford, or Norwich, or Bradford, or Woodstock, are bigger towns. They are not the towns gaining the most housing as a percent. It is outlying towns. This was a common thing that we saw earlier, and of course, from
Is
the
that primarily sprawl? Is that just like people buying a 10-acre lot on a mountainside and throwing a house on it?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's what most of those games are?
Yep, trying to buy a
That's what I would
house.
imagine.
Somewhat it's driven by land prices being cheaper out there, but it's also driven somewhat by people thinking, oh, I want to live out there, and then commute to wherever I need to go. Which is an interesting thought, but it's not a good idea in many sorts of ways from a land use perspective, because you're commuting all the way down here. You're living up in Topsom or whatever, and you're commuting down here. And as long as gas prices are cheap, that works. As long as we don't take into account global warming and your carbon footprint, that works. And there's all sorts of other reasons why we'd rather have people be building and living right now. Like right now, there's a bunch of housing development going on in Hartford, which is good. So we're going to be upping the number of units right in Hartford. You can walk out your door, go to the store, go to the coffee shop, go to the doctor's, go to work, walk home. And you'll be more healthy too, doing all that walking.
That was my life in Chicago.
Yeah. So we're trying to do that. There is the state housing needs assessment, which is out there. We have a somewhat dated housing needs assessment, I would say, for the Two Rivers region. And right now, we're working together with our counterpart on the New Hampshire side. This is not the Atlantic Ocean, that's actually New Hampshire over there. We're working with them, and I think you guys, Tom, and Vital Communities, on looking at an upper valley, so a greater bi-state housing needs assessment, perhaps, because all the information out there is a little dated right now. And from an economic and kind of commuter shed point of view, it makes sense on both sides of the river. So we have some housing data in-house, and we can scrounge around and get you more. There is the housing section of our regional plan, which we're going to try to update some this year. But just talk with your local nonprofit housing providers, which in this region is primarily the Twin Pines Housing Trust. Ask them what's going on. Talk to private developers and ask them what's going on. Talk to realtors. We have an excellent session twice a year where we get some real estate input on vacancy rates and things like that. Needless to say, still very tight in our region. And there is projections out there for population. The actually, I think my next slide might have population stuff. Yes, this is actually from Planning Magazine. And so what this shows, this talks about age cohorts. And so what you can see is this is the 1990 to 2010, so that's a 20-year time frame, and this is the 2010 to 2030. So now we're over on this part of life. But this is essentially the baby boomers. And so these are millions of new people entering that age category. So this is from 45 to 64. So you can see we've got many millions of new people entering that age category. They're probably a second-time home buyer or whatever in there, but they're still in the workforce. You go forward, you look at that same period right there. We don't have any millions of new people entering that age group. We've got the mini boomlet here entering our workforce down here, about 10 million people total, but what we really have is many millions of people retiring. And so that begs the question as to when we're talking about who do we need housing for. We need housing, we need some housing so we can grab some of these people in Vermont, 10 million people. If we get 1% of them, that'd be great. 3% would be lovely. But then there are all of these people as well, and Vermont being one of the oldest states in the nation, of course, that graph would be even more skewed if we looked at it just for Vermont. So what do these folks need? They need a big, long driveway to slip on days like today, and something that's too big to mow, yep. And you can't shovel anymore, and whatever. No, they want first floor living, maybe ADA accessible at least, somewhere where the neighbors can check on them, and someplace close to services as well. So that's, and not a great big house to vacuum and clean. So whether it's the 17 units going up in Hartford right now or other things, we need to be looking at constructing or retrofitting
Yeah.
for those folks. And if we just looked at population, thinking about this, if we just looked at population curves too, one of the things planners we're always kind of, worrying about growth management. We don't have a lot of growth to manage right now. We have Windsor County losing population slightly, Orange County gaining population slightly, but everything roughly static. And so, to me, our two main issues are we need different housing for the people we have, especially as they age, and then we need housing that's appropriate for the people we want to attract, which are young families primarily coming in. So what kind of housing? The first thing I would say is to try to gather widespread acceptance of the problem. Like anything you're going to try to fix in life, you first have to admit you have a problem about it, right? And it's difficult because most of the people in the meetings have homes. And they're like, not my problem. And some of what you're trying to do is you're at least trying to get more units on the market, which could depress housing prices, which would of course make homes more affordable, which is the whole point of making homes more affordable. But it can be seen as a threat to existing homeowners' equity out there as well. What we try to say is, there's more to the world than your homeowner's equity necessarily. There's all those other parts of your community. You're worried your school's gonna close, that's because you need young families to come in. You're worried that there's no volunteer firefighters, that's because you need young families to come in. So all those
That's
other
our big
things.
problem in Norwich, is we don't have any children in school. I mean, we have children, but it's very underutilized. And
Yeah.
as a result, money's just flowing out of town
Right.
because of the way that distribution works.
Right, because right now, most of our schools have a lot of capacity.
Right.
Just like our roads. We don't need to build a new road at all.
Yeah.
We've got lots of road out there. We've got, actually, most places have a lot of sewer capacity existing out there. We tend to have plenty of water. There are infrastructure needs in maintaining those things, but capacity-wise, we've got a lot of room. We don't need to build another classroom, we just need to fill those classrooms. And of course, there are other parts of the country that are like trying to build a school every week.
Yeah.
So we just need to somehow build a pipeline from here to there, get them over here. Is there an understanding of the issue and people affected? To me, you have to try to make people care about the issue, or get them to understand that they already care about the issue because they want to love their neighbor, or they know so-and-so and they never realize, oh, they can't.
They're gonna have to move.
They're gonna have to move.
That's what's happening all over our town.
Yeah.
Or
Or
people and stuff.
they
They
can't,
have to go.
or they're looking to downsize in the town and they can't stay in
And
the
there's no
community.
stock, yeah.
There's no next place, right. And then we have, on the regional planning side, we are required to comport with the state planning goals, of which there's several, but one is the kind of main land use one is to have development in compact centers surrounded by open countryside. So we just don't want rural sprawl as the answer. It's not just, oh, houses, let's just build houses everywhere.
And I think there's one other issue, which is the compact village centers. So many of them are in coastal areas or areas that are getting flooded.
Oh, yeah, not in our region, but yes, other places, coastal areas.
Right, well, other areas, coastal areas, but even in ours, I mean, a lot of the villages are in the areas that are close to or getting flooded.
Yeah.
Floodplains.
Yeah.
Floodplains, or they're not in the floodplains, they're in the 500-year floodplain, but they're still getting flooded. So, because of all of the tributaries or whatever's happening. So it seems to me that that's also thinking a little bit more about how do we deal with the impact of climate change in the context of where we build our housing.
Right.
Because compact village centers may not be the best thing in some communities because of the climate issues. So we have to figure that out as well.
Right, I mean, if you're in Chelsea, for example, right now, in our region has the highest concentration of structures in the mapped flood zone in their village.
Right, exactly.
And so, yeah, you just don't want to say, well, let's just build all over the middle of Chelsea. probably should build a little back up on the edge here, back up on the edge there. In other towns, Hartford, we've got pretty good resilience around flooding. West Hartford's a little touchier there, but you're right. So again, when we're looking at building housing, we want to think about where are the transit lines. We want to think about, is it a floodplain? We want to think about, is there any type of store or service nearby? All of those mix of things. We just don't want to be like, well, so let's find a cheap spot of land and put down some houses. Yeah, definitely not. So in your town plans have to address housing. There's a housing element required in town plans. Every town in the region either has a plan or is working on a plan, which is good. The statute says if you can't figure out your housing needs, you should look to the regional commission, and we're supposed to help you come up with your housing needs for your town plan. And the biggest thing we would look at there is the census figures for households that are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. So that's the kind of quickest number we try to grab. Roughly in our region, we know that that's about 4,000 to 5,000 households are spending.
How many total households?
Out of about 30,000 households.
That seems
Okay,
low,
so-
really low.
That's what we would say is are spending more than, and then if we add in transportation on top of that, a lot more go into the mix. But it's thousands of households, it's not hundreds of households. And so if we think about that, and back to growth management, we're not gaining thousands of people, we're gaining tens of people as a year, but we're moving thousands of people into the senior category in terms of age cohort, and we have thousands of people right now in the region who need housing. But I boil it down and I say I want 4,000 units of affordable housing built now, and I want another 4,000 units built in the next 10 to 15 years to deal with all those new families we want.
Are those kinds of solid numbers a good idea to put in the plan?
Yeah,
and
when we bring it down to a
individual
town scale, it's a little tougher, especially in a
Yeah.
small town, because you don't want to necessarily say I want 172 versus
you throw the number 100 out.
we need 100 or we need dozens out there. And again, I think if you say we want 100 housing units built, somebody imagines one block that's 100 housing units in it.
Absolutely.
Versus a little thing here and a little thing there. And so how do you put them in there? That's why I put in this bullet about, does your town plan talk about the type of housing? And so instead of just saying, we want 100 houses, have a picture of the kind of houses you want. Have a picture of the latest little development that put 4 units on that little side street or something. So that people can go, oh, that's the thing that they're talking about. Not just I think people think of projects in Newark when we mention housing. And when we talk about clustering.
Yeah, or like those cluster neighborhoods in the Midwestern suburbs. They're just basically you can draw a line anywhere, drop a house anywhere, and it's relatively the same.
Yeah, and when we talk around clustering, especially when you don't have sewer and water, which is where most of our towns are, you're still talking about houses on like 1 acre lots, practically, because they have to have on-site sewer and water.
Yeah.
So it's clustering compared to 10-acre lots, but it's not clustering in any way, shape, or form when you feel it. Again, does your town plan talk about housing in locations suitable for development, so not in the floodplain? And we'll talk about that. One of the main parts that your town plan would have is it has something called the future land use map, and that's really where it says more here, less over there. And again, does it just say we wish somebody would come along and make housing for us, or does it actually have some type of clear strategy? We're going to work with Twin Pines Housing Trust and apply for a grant, or we're going to work with this nonprofit, or we're going to get the high school kids to build a house every year, or however you're going to do it. Have a recommendation that has a actor, a person, an organization that's stuck to it. And this is kind of your. I didn't put the picture in here. The talk kind of came this way, and I looked at this and I'm like, oh, it looks like town meeting, because this is our demographic right here, right? You see, we need young people I think, like, I was trying to find the young person in this room, and I think it's whoever this is right here. They're probably the young person. And then we need housing for all these older people who are gonna want smaller units typically. And again, smaller, safer, lighter, close to stock. So we're gonna talk about regulations and we're gonna talk about no regulations. So, and in regulations primarily, we're gonna talk about zoning and somewhat subdivision bylaws. But if you have any questions along the line, just shoot.
So, yeah, I do. When it comes to subdivision bylaws,
Mhm.
can the town say that if you're gonna have bylaws, they need to include this? Because I'm from Illinois, and the subdivision bylaws were usually formed by the people living there. Like, we had bylaws governing our subdivision that were, you know, there was a board that could change them and amend them and stuff.
Yeah, the
And I
town develops them, and the town adopts them.
Okay,
There are some things by statute that you have to do, but not a lot,
Okay.
especially in subdivision bylaws.
okay.
And,
That's a little different than Illinois.
and we typically, with the regional commission, we're typically helping the towns under contract get those things done. They can be combined with the zoning in what we call a unified bylaw now, which kind of makes the permitting a little easier. And I just had a question today on some subdivision stuff. Oftentimes, you can even exempt some subdivisions out of your subdivision bylaw and say, you know,
Lot mergers,
what?
lot mergers.
Lot mergers and lot line adjustments. And you can even do, we have some towns that do kind of a quasi Act 250. In Act 250, it's, you know, 5 lots within 5 miles within 5 years, triggers Act 250. But we have a lot of towns that say the first subdivision you cut off your land, we don't care about. Because everybody like wants to give a lot to their kid or something.
Mhm.
So you can just say, that doesn't need a subdivision permit, off you go.
So, being on that end of the planning process, in a town, I'm not a strong advocate of just exempting a lot of stuff because unfortunately, what we find out after the fact is that there have been some things that weren't quite done correctly. So we're, over the last, my tenure of the last 20 some odd years in Hartford, we've been catching up with trying to get a lot of that stuff done correctly.
Yeah.
So, you know, somebody might subdivide something and it doesn't meet the minimum lot size, or now that we're looking at how the subdivisions actually impact stormwater management, if somebody just lops it off, you know, or what, are you creating a lot that's a buildable lot? You know, so we're trying to give flexibility in our last bid by, for example, if you're doing a lot merger, that's a little bit less of an impact, but if it affects where your buildable area can be, you know, because now we have people, they have to create the building lot areas, because we want to minimize the impact on the natural resources. So there's a lot of challenges with exempting too much, and that's just the one.
Yeah, I wasn't advocating.
Right, no, I understand that, but sometimes it's just, wanting to make sure that.
And in fact, for most of
Challenges of trying to simplify sometimes make it.
Yeah, I'm kind of on a subdivision kick for the last, I don't know, 5-6 years. And that for most of our rural towns, I would actually forego zoning in favor of subdivision.
Yeah, because it sets the structure.
It sets the structure, and really what we hear in most of our rural towns is that they want to protect fields and forests and views and things like that. And subdivision is how you do that, because typically under zoning, once you've carved out that lot up in the corner, all you have to do is stay, 25 feet from the boundary and just put your house any which way. And that's where zoning is. Whereas it's much more to go in the subdivision go, no, put the lot down here, not up there. So that's the other thing. And then there's that weird connection between state subdivision permits and towns, in which we say, no, you don't need a permit, but you should go get a state subdivision permit because you just cut off your only septic replacement field when you did this weird little thing. And personally, I always advocate for surveys as well. We're not required to have a survey prior to transfer of title. I think maybe the only state that still does it that way. But it is crazy because then you end up with the corner of your house on somebody else's lot when you get around to surveying. Yeah, it costs you $1,000. It makes your house worth $1,000 more. So zoning processes, I think this is actually the city of Burlington's
Yeah, sounds,
chart,
looks familiar.
so, which we, you know, we're trying not to have a complex thing, but in general, having written a lot of these, we try to say, make the review process for the thing you want easy, and for the thing that you don't want hard, versus run them both through the exact same process. So we have, and as you'll see as we go forward on the slides, we kind of have these beginner, intermediate, advanced steps. So a beginner step, maybe just hold open house meetings. You know, try to work with a developer ahead of time so they understand, okay, this is what the rules say, and these are some things that you can do. Just, a lot of people don't spend a lot of time and energy thinking about how to develop a piece of land. And so you could just talk with people and say, you know, well, you could put your house up there, but you know what? In the winter, there's a big plow bill, it'd be easier to put your house down here.
So you talk to them when they buy a property, when a lot turns over,
Or talk to them prior to, you know, them coming in and giving you a zoning application,
Right, okay.
if you can. Talk to neighbors before you get into a contentious legal issue,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps. This is a relatively in the last 10 years or so, new piece of law, in that the law now allows the administrative officer, the zoning administrator, to handle things that would go before review bodies.
Just right now we have PUDs at, I think it's 9 or 4, 5. So there's some units where it hits a PUD and you have to go to certain.
For the development review board or
Yeah.
something. But there are ways when you can go, oh yeah, for these type of things, you're just gonna go get a permit and off you go. Which is nice, because it makes it a little easier, a little faster. And then in the advanced things, try to do shorter review times. You know, you have 30 days and you have 45 days and these mandatory clocks. But there's nothing that says you can't try to push those along. And again, exempt what you can without, you know, shooting yourself in the foot in the land of unintended consequences. This is just an example from up in Duxbury, Vermont, not Duxbury, Mass, about looking at your dimensional requirements. We have a lot of towns where the dimensional requirements, especially in village type settings, don't match what you actually have. And so you go, oh, everybody needs a 40-foot setback. And you go, well, nobody has a 40-foot setback.
Yeah.
So go out, but people aren't necessarily great about doing that. So now with the remote sensing, the new orthophotos just came in somewhat, and there, you know, you can't read the license plate, but you can see the license plate. So we have very good stuff, so you can do it remotely, but you could also just walk around with your planning commission.
Where do you find those remote images?
That's all served now from the Center for Geographic Information.
Okay.
And if you're like me with computers, which is a little so-so, what I do is I walk across the hall and I ask Pete. And,
Pull it up for you.
and to do something.
All right, give me his card.
But for you all out there,
You can call Pete too.
yeah, you just call me and I walk across the hall and ask Pete. So it's a two-step process. Or you can call Pete directly. And because we can take some of those files, which are huge files,
Oh, I'm sure.
and just clip them out to a specific spot. And then, you know, now even just on Google Earth, you just use the ruler tool and you can just start, you know, kind of going,
Oh, yeah,
you know,
do that all the
okay,
time.
you know, we're this distance, that distance. So try to measure what you actually have and use what you actually have. And use pictures of that, again, in your bylaw. If you're talking about, for example, 1/5 of an acre lots, right, 8,000 square foot lots. That's what Woodstock Village is zoned at.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about Woodstock Village and you go, oh, that doesn't, Newark tenements.
Right.
And now we have drones and, you know, you can get some kid to take a picture of your village, that type of thing. So you can go, okay, this is what we're talking about if we're talking about 1/4 acre lots or 1/8 the size of an acre lots or whatever. And this is what we actually have. The intermediate step would be to actually separate lot size from density. And so there we get into typically more in the rural areas, although you could do it in a planned unit development type situation.
And we've done that in White River.
In White
That's what
River.
we did. It's an FAR,
A floor area ratio
right?
issue. So here, this would say, again, in our rural towns, where a lot of towns, they don't want a lot of stuff going on out there, so they may have a 5-acre zoning, or even 10-acre zoning in places, which is good in large parts of town, but there's no sense in the person buying 10 acres. Because the farmer who's selling it, they've got a farm, or they've got a, big piece of timberland. You sell it to somebody 10 acres, well, they can't put it in current use because it's too small. Nobody's gonna log it because it's too small. And 10 acres is just darn big unless you've got something you wanna really do on 10 acres. It'd be much better to go density, stay 1 unit per 10 acres, but you can sell a 1-acre lot, you keep the other 9 acres. By permit, we extinguish the right to put a house on these other 9 acres. And you do that over maybe 40 acres. So now we've got 3 1-acre lots down here by the road. Everybody's happy. I've kept my 37 acres back over here. And now I can sell that to a logger, or I could log it. And I can keep it in current use. And so that's a density thing. It's not making more things, it's just I call it moving the monopoly houses around the board. It's like,
Right,
let's put all those
and
down.
that's worked well for us, by doing it that way. I think the one thing, little bit of trying to track it a little bit better, because, you wanna have that 1-acre lot you could cut off, but you
Right.
wanna make sure that that 9-acre doesn't all of a sudden say, oh, now we can
Right.
slice off another 1 acre or whatever,
Yeah,
but yeah,
you have
so
to
it's a little bit of a tracking situation, but.
Yeah, and you can do it with an easement, although I actually like just doing it by permit, in case the
Yeah.
rules change.
Yeah,
And then there are more complicated things like lot coverage and floor area ratio and stuff, where you actually talk about the land on the, and how much you're gonna cover up, and things like that. Which you're using floor area ratio?
yeah, in White River,
In White River Junction.
downtown. Which we're looking at expanding into other parts of town.
Oh, go ahead. We have some towns look at lot coverage, but most aren't even looking at lot coverage yet. They're still just at the minimum lot size. This just gives you some examples of what things actually look like on 1 unit per acre, 3-acre lots, 1-acre lots, 4 units per acre, 2 units per acre, and stuff. And so we're going to talk about 1/4-acre lots a little bit, but it's, with good design, you can fit a lot in a small space. And some of that's just even through landscaping. So these are 1/4-acre lots, just again another schematic to try to figure out, like this is 1/4 acre down there. So you go, oh, that's not, everybody jammed up shoulder to shoulder. It's still plenty of room. These are different examples of different densities. So here we have, we have 1/3 of an acre, we've got a 1/4 acre, we've got a 1/5 of an acre, and we've got a 1/7-ish of an acre here. So you could, again, if you were building at this density, which again, that's a good size house. My house is much closer to this size than this size, but this is a 1 dwelling unit, so you could do 5 of these per acre. Or you could, you could get 6 dwelling units in a structure nearly that size, assuming you're going up some, and that's just on a 1/3 acre lot. So that actually can give you 20 units per acre. Or 18 to 20. That says 20, but.
Those are from Brattleboro.
Yeah.
Those are clear.
So those are examples from Brattleboro. So again, you could even use these in your bylaws, but you could use these in your plan too. To again, break whatever mental image people have of those people living in those houses out there and go, and even better if you can take a picture of your own town and go, this is what we
This
want.
is an example of a 3-acre lot with 1 dwelling unit right here in town.
Right here.
That really is powerful.
And if you can take them with a leaf on, because if you're down, you get some decent landscaping on lots like this, you can hardly see the next house, right? And especially when we talk to towns about clustering in the more rural towns down to 1-acre lot sizes, and everybody starts to think, oh, that's teeny weeny, and everybody's so tight. it's, you can't throw a baseball and hit the next house.
Well, see, we were in Norwich when I was a kid, and still to this day, when you go down Church Street and you're heading south on north on Route 5, and you look off to the left, there's a bunch of houses. There's nothing between those, so every house has an enormous backyard because nobody did any landscaping, and it really worked out as like this. I mean, we played kick the can in there until the sun went down because it was, 3 families and a couple old people, and it was just a huge shared lot.
Right.
Which I think common spaces
Yeah.
so sorely lacking.
And good developers can do that type of stuff. And again, it's difficult to mandate a lot of that.
Oh yeah.
But your town plan could at least talk about it.
Yeah.
And you could try to do ways to encourage it. Again, Hyde Park, they looked at non-conforming lots in terms of going out and measuring what you have. And again, if you have nearly everybody non-conforming, then it's probably your bylaw that's non-conforming versus everybody out there. So fix your bylaw and get it back to the shape that you want. And see if you can try to create some type of gradation between we are more dense here and less dense out there. These are a couple of the things that I like to try to promote. Waivers under zoning, we're allowed to do waivers. Again, a relatively new ability. We used to issue variances when we shouldn't have issued variances out there amongst towns. Waivers are for dimensional requirements only. You have to create a box about how you're going to do it, who's going to do it, what are the standards, by which you say, okay, yeah, you can eat into that front yard or that side yard or go up or whatever. And I maintain, there's some discussion about it, but that you can provide incentives in there. You say, oh, we're going to give you that bonus lot. Or that, if you're in an affordable housing project, you do get to go a little bit further into the setback, or you get to do this, that. Because that's one of those other purposes that our town plan is trying to do, and we're able to do it here. Adaptive reuse is something that I suggest that our rural communities especially look at as a use in their zoning bylaw, and that's to deal with larger pre-existing structures. And so I suggest that you write it that it has to be there 10 years. So nobody's going to build a barn and then say, ha, it's not a barn now, I'm going to turn it into condos. But if they've got a barn,
I get it.
And it's been there for a while, if you make them wait 10 years, they're either very, very patient people, or they just happen to have a barn that they don't have anything to do with.
So in talking about adaptive reuse, are you talking about making that one of the exceptions, or creating
I just suggest it as a special use, as a use that's allowable, and you say, okay, in the like in the rural residential district, for example, if you're in a larger, older structure, a structure that's 10 years old and larger, and you want to build multifamily, where we may not want multifamily all over the place, which is a hard sell in some rural areas, but we've got the big old barn, and if you put 5 units in that barn, it's still going to look like the barn when you get all said and done. I would say you'd probably want to look at some type of site plan standards around that.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's a community that you would point to that say, oh, they've got a good write-up on this, or this is something new?
This is something that I've had communities adopt, but I don't have a particular project. I'd love to, I have some houses I could point to that said it.
But what about the regulation and what they're allowing in terms of density, or some of the regulations around?
Typically what they're doing is they're allowing that to be a multifamily unit.
Of how many?
Well, in most of our towns, a multifamily is limited to 5.
Oh, no.
And they don't have sewer and water, and they're kind of, I think, constrained by site stuff. You could certainly push it up higher than that in other areas, but for no services available, 5 units, pretty good thing. The right across from the Prosper School is Harding Place, which is kind of it's a house and maybe a barn. And we often get that several structures that were one property.
Well, there are at least 3 or 4 of those in there.
And there's 5 units in that particular compound. But I can think of other places between big old farmhouse and big old barn, where if you did it right, you know, and again under site plan, you said, well, we're gonna put the parking back here, and yeah, you know, we're gonna deal with your lighting, and maybe, you know, the neighbors over here are a little upset because there used to be just one old lady next door, now there's gonna be 10 people, so we're gonna have you build a hedge over here for screening and whatnot. But again, save the structure, get the new families, you know, don't, and give the old lady somebody to sell to, because nobody else is buying the big old barn maybe. A bunch of things that you can do out there with that type of.
The good thing about barns is they're all on their roads, because farmers are practical.
Yeah.
So they fit that one criteria off the bat usually.
And you know, they're great structures.
Oh, yeah. And it's also a way to preserve them,
Yeah.
because we've done an inventory of barns, and we've lost a lot in the last 15, 20 years.
And they're all open, you know, you don't have to rip off all the walls to get in there to the barn, because you don't have any walls, you know. You just get it started. Types of homes, again, most towns deal with singles and duplexes as one and the same thing. You're required to allow multifamily in some district in your town. That's one of the newer changes along there. It's usually 3 and up, because below there's the single duplex. In more urban areas, it's essentially an apartment building. Accessory dwelling units are required by law, so whether your bylaw has come up to date or not, accessory dwelling units are allowed.
What's an accessory dwelling unit, like a mother-in-law cottage?
Yes, we used to call them mother-in-law cottages, and so they have 30% or less of the principal structure in terms of square footage.
Okay.
And the legislature, somebody was, I don't know, they were using the dictionary and starting at the beginning in the A's, and they're like, what's this word? Let's use this appurtenant, right?
Okay.
That's how they
Everybody's looking it up.
Yeah, right, and so
Does not have to be attached.
yeah, it has to be appurtenant, which means
On the same lot.
near or something, yeah.
Close proximity.
Close proximity.
Right.
So it can be inside the structure, attached to the structure, or separate from the structure, but not too far away. And so if you wanted to build that little tiny house and put it in your yard, off you go. It just has to meet all your other stuff, but basically everybody gets to build one of these things
And
By
that's
law.
by state law.
by state law.
Oh, that's gonna
And
make
you can
Dean so
require,
happy.
you can allow it to be a larger percentage.
And, yeah, and
Within
the
your
statute
own
says,
bylaws.
you don't have to stick with the 30%, you could.
So
you could-
30 is the minimum according to the state law. Like, you can't say that, like, we can't say that an accessory dwelling unit is 20%.
Correct.
Correct,
So
Yeah.
it has to
Yeah.
be 30. But
And-
we
and-
can say you can make it,
50%.
okay.
Or you might say, you might say 30% or up to 600 square feet, whichever is greater, because, somebody's got a teeny house, that means they have an extra teeny accessory dwelling unit.
Yeah.
So, the
But
other
if they
thing,
have a Mongo house,
right, but the other thing you can do is flip, everybody thinks that the accessory dwelling unit has to be the non-principal owner unit, but it doesn't.
Right.
You can flip it. So if you wanted to create a little accessory dwelling unit, and that would be for your retirement home,
Right,
you can,
that's exactly what I was just thinking.
yes,
Yeah.
so,
Very practical with an aging population.
yeah.
It's very attractive.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
that
you
is
can think
ideal.
ahead and you can kind of go, well, I'll have this rental thing and then I'll design it the way I like it, so then
Yeah,
later.
I'll build
it's
my
gonna-
tiny house by hand, they can have their, 60,
Yeah, and then-
65
and
to
then you wanna
70,
flip
build
it,
a nice
you
house
can-
for yourself.
yeah.
Right.
And
It's
then
like when your
let the
teenagers
fun.
are your size, they're growing up and you're like, I think you should buy those boots because I'm gonna get those boots because you're gonna keep
Because you're
growing.
gonna keep growing. I did that twice.
Just a hint for you people out
3
there that are
boys.
young parents.
3 boys, I did it
The thing
twice.
is coming.
A nice pair of Red Wings and some mutts.
Group care homes have statutory protection if there are certain sizes out there, so you can't just say, nope, not here. I have a couple of towns putting lodging houses, boarding houses in as a use. So just like we used to do, it's not a hotel, it's a place. And so I have some definitions around that, but it's a place we're expected to come down, have food, go back up to your room, but not super transient. I haven't dealt with transient housing in here a lot, but with the whole Airbnb issues and around that, There's a lot of transient housing going on. It's a difficult thing to regulate well, but it's also taking a lot of housing off
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
market for people who actually live there. Not, I don't know in Burlington maybe, but certainly other parts of the world.
Oh, Long Island's having a huge problem with that.
Yeah, it's not.
It's so dense there. that people
And then of
are
course,
abandoning
mixed-use
them.
development, allow housing and commercial stuff to coexist.
Well, yeah, that's the one that we floated in February in Norwich and met a huge amount of resistance on because of that potential commercial side. It was very hard to convince people that we could put in regulations that would stop like a Rite Aid or a Walmart or a Jiffy Lube from coming into
Right.
Norwich. And it was like, we can do this.
Yeah, you can totally do that.
Because we had some good ideas. We had no parking between the buildings and the street. We had no all-night lighting. We had no large signs. We had, green space. If you're building multi-unit development, you have to build green space equivalent to the floor space of the first floor of all the buildings so that they'd be shared. I mean, I thought we did a really good job, but the fear went through the roof that someone was gonna put in some,
Well, and just by doing something like limiting signage, you're gonna take a lot of the commercial stuff off of the plate.
Right.
Because they're gonna go, I don't wanna be there because I can't have a sign, bigger than this.
yeah.
So there are always ways to do that. Again, if you can't figure it out at the town level, ask the town next to you, and, call your regional planning commission. And I'm sure, that's the kind of fun part of my job when I get those calls. I'm like, oh, let's get out the toolkit.
Yeah, okay.
This is exactly the thing we were just talking about, where you live in the big house and then eventually you live in the little house. ADUs out there.
I really like that.
Again, allow multifamily. We, in general, whenever we're working on a bylaw now, we're trying to push multifamily out there. So where it was a conditional use in the village, we're trying to say permitted use in every village. Now, in your medium density rural stuff, go from not allowed to a conditional use. And okay, out in the Timbuktu, maybe you only do it as an adaptive use. Incentivize, again, if you have permit fees, you can lower those permit fees, allow those density bonuses we were talking about, like the waivers, and adopt inclusionary zoning.
Can I ask a very ignorant question? Is the density bonus just like you can build more than what's on the books?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You
Yeah,
can do certain things.
essentially we
If you're
will,
building housing and
Right.
it's got this number of affordable units, then you can exceed R4 and go to 8.
yeah,
That's what density bonus means.
yeah, and you
So I
will,
thought, I just wanted to confirm.
you'll make
those
more
things,
money.
what's in there.
and we'll get more housing.
Yeah, you'll have more units to sell and,
Yeah.
okay.
The downside to that, and that's where some design issues are probably appropriate to stick on there as well, is because the neighbor thought, well, I thought they could only do 2 units next to me, and now they can do 4, and there's more than I thought. And you go, well, yeah, but the parking's on the other side, and there's a bush, and everybody is always nervous about those things. The house across from me sold. Little old lady lived there, half the year. Nothing going on. I'd go over there, I'd use the garden in the back of the house, it's flat on the hill. And then it's sold, like, oh, who's gonna live there? What's gonna happen? Well, a wonderful family lives over there. They have these 2 little kids who now come over and help me shovel my drive, and eventually there'll be bigger kids to help me shovel my drive.
Yeah.
When
Yeah,
you're
no,
older,
kids
they
are-
do it.
Yeah.
Kids are the number one
And so
thing
it's a
I want in our
lovely
town.
thing to have, but people get worried to me too much about,
Yeah.
that extra neighbor. Well, that extra neighbor is the person who pulls you out of the snowbank. It's not just an extra neighbor who gives you grief.
Well, yeah, and I don't want to sound too bigoted here, but I think that problem increases as the population ages. And so as a region, as we age in a region, it's going to be harder and harder and harder to do this kind of work because the level of fear and apprehension is so great when you're 70 and your lifelong friend sold their house across the street.
Right.
It's a little bit more of an impact. So I'm very sensitive to that in my town because there is a lot of nervousness, and I understand it. I mean, when you're old, you don't have a lot of options, and
Well,
you're very aware of
You
that.
just get more crotchety too, I think, as we all get older.
Yeah, I hope to.
But inclusionary zoning are things like mandating affordable housing and saying, okay,
Okay.
for every 10th unit you build, for every 10 units, one's going to be
Yeah,
affordable.
that was what we
Or
tried
you
in our flow.
put a fee
You
in.
tried that?
It was part of the package that got rejected because of the mixed use part of it.
Oh, that part of it was the objection.
No, the part of the objection to the mixed use was the commercial thing, the risk of commercial overrun, which I think is very real unless you really get into it and understand it. So, I mean, I understood that, but what we tried to do in the other part was say, if you're gonna build a number of units, you absolutely have to have, 25 to 40% of them be affordable.
And it works in places that have some pressure, where you can say, okay, here, if you get no pressure on your town, it just doesn't work as well. Reducing parking requirements, I think is one of the easiest things, just say, not 2, maybe 1, maybe 0. Especially in downtown areas where there's lots of options, and people may not want a car to begin with. It can help you, getting that more housing, of course, can help you with the population loss, which we've talked about, help your business and community. Even poor people shop. You get more people in town, there will be more stuff going on.
If you do it as a percent of income, they shop a lot more.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That money moves through the economy fast, the velocity of the money. Again, look for those smaller homes as people need to downsize. And your younger residents may need that first little unit out there. They'd love a big unit, but they may be able to get a little thing. I always say, crawl before you walk before you run. Do little things if you can as you get there. Find out what other towns near you have done. If it's just a model, try not to just take it and stick it in your thing. Try to see if it worked. Municipal planning grants are a good way to actually do this if you need some funding, available every year. Non-regulatory stuff.
One quick question. In our area, in your experience with the towns around us, who's been having the most success developing affordable housing and just getting things on the ground and done? Is there one town we can look to?
I think Hartford is probably where we're seeing most of the action in our region, which makes sense. It's where we want it.
And it's bigger.
Hartford lost 500 people, and so we're trying to get those people back in there. We don't need to build a new road or a new sewer treatment plant or any of that type of stuff.
Yeah, I think we're in the same boat in Norwich.
And so we've
got the roads we've got.
You can put more people in there. You have a lot of older housing, so there's a lot of rehab, but there's some new construction, of course, going on right now. And so I would say they're leading the charge. And again, if we're trying to use various public funding sources for housing, they're going to try to have the housing be close to services, close to transit lines, that type of thing. So we're going to whip through non-regulatory stuff too. You can actually make town land. The town can buy land and say, we're going to be a developer of sorts. Or you can get a non-profit to buy
Well,
some.
we used to do that with the poor farms.
Yeah.
In every town. That was always a town-owned land.
Make sure all those other pieces are available and you can reduce fees and that. Transit is a huge one though, because that's a major portion of the cost that people don't need to be paying out for their car. Basic stuff, create a housing task force. So you can actually have a housing commission. The law has long allowed towns to create housing commissions. Work with those land trusts. Again, if the farmer is selling and doing an easement on their farm, talk to them and say, yeah, everybody loves this field, but can't we get 2 little house lots up there, and, on that edge over there? And again, the conservation folks aren't necessarily thinking about housing all the time. They're doing their job over here.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of opportunity to me to get some of that value out of that too. And maybe the farmer just doesn't want to live in their big drafty old farmhouse, but they'd love to look at their field from this nice little cozy house up in the corner.
Yeah, that's what the Sullivans did in Norwich 20 years ago. Yeah, they moved into the barn so they'd see the field.
Look, healthcare more and more and senior services for senior housing options. United Way in our region has this thing called Working Bridges Program, which I think is wonderful, and I think they have it up in Chittenden County too, where essentially they have a person who's supported by some area businesses who helps deal with housing issues for employees. Your landlord's being a pain. You need to, get the washing machine in place, whatever. And by that, they help cut down on employee turnover a lot for the businesses. The employers are happier because they have housing. The employers are happy because the employee isn't missing work and they're turning over and whatnot. And it's way cheaper than doing anything else. And so it just makes sense all the way around. Again, you can cut costs if you have town fees out there. There may be brownfield funding available through regional planning commissions or other to actually get a site that everybody's with back into production.
Agway.
And again, support that transit as much as you
Hey
can.
Kevin, with the support transit, I feel like people are always answering those surveys of saying they want the transit in the town, but then those same people that answer those surveys aren't actually using the transit that they just said that they wanted. So there's that big gap there that I think needs to be.
Right, and
Addressed
you
as
know,
well.
for most of our region, the transit is just, to me, it's not often enough. So it's one of those things that you just need to do it more, and I think we'll see more people using it. And in this neck of the woods, it's free, which is good.
Yeah, I wondered how much they could up their cycle.
It's ridership.
People need to
It's
ride
a
it, or else
balance.
to
Yeah.
give them the data to actually support getting more funding from the
Yeah,
state or wherever they're
but
getting
it
the
is one
funding
of those
from.
catch-22s.
It's a little bit of a
It's the
catch.
It
frequency,
really is.
I mean, there's a lot of challenges with people who want to take transit can't because they don't have the flexibility. So one of the things that we're looking at is how can you create alternative modes of transport during the day? So if you have to go pick up your kid, or you have to go to a doctor's appointment or something like that, you have a way of getting there, but it doesn't necessitate you driving your car, and you can take transit. So we've got to be really, really creative in our different ways of doing that, because I think that's the biggest challenge we face right now is people would like to do it, but they don't have the flexibility. I live in Windsor.
Right.
If I could just hop on the train in 10 minutes, I'd be at work.
Yeah.
But I can't do that, and to get from my house to work is ridiculous. I've done some carpooling, and that helps, but again, if I need a car during the day, it's a challenge.
Yeah,
So-
and one thing that I don't think is mentioned anywhere in this talk is telecommuting. Is we
Right,
still in our
right.
region do not have broadband and cell service in lots of places. And if you could build the nicest house possible at the greatest price point out there, if you can't get a cell signal in the house, none of those new families are gonna buy it, because that's the only phone they have.
Yeah, no,
And they're just
I've,
like, why would I go home and not be able to talk to anybody on my phone?
yeah, I telecommute my entire time. I've been back here a decade, and I've had to live where there's Comcast, and there were some beautiful homes for rent and just lovely. I mean, places I would have much preferred to live that cost less, that were simply not an option
Yeah, it's
because of that broadband.
It's just
issue.
like having walls around houses.
Oh yeah,
And you just kind of go, oh, I can't live there because I can't get through that wall. Well, we need to have that telecom stuff, and despite what people say in other parts of the state, we have massive places in our region that do not have cell service or.
it's ridiculous. Is what it is.
I'm gonna talk about this a little bit. This is a tough nut and very more urban, but there's something called the neighborhood development area, which you can apply for, and it gets you through some of the permitting processes easier, but it has to be adjacent to a designated town center or village, and it has to have a various bunch of things. And I think I put, did I put, oh no I didn't. It can't be more than 1 unit, 4 units per acre, so you have to be at least that dense. There are requirements about the actual your garages and the setbacks and that type of thing. So your zoning really has to be up to a certain snuff.
Not just your
To be able to
zoning,
use
it seemed to me when I was reading that, your geography also has to support it, because, I mean, we've got a very small village center in our
Yeah.
town, and almost, it abuts a hill almost everywhere, so
Right.
you can't make a building zone on a cliff. I mean, one end of town is Cliff Street, and then we butt Route 5, which is like pretty much,
Yeah, in many of our villages, it'd be more infill than build on the edge, just because
Yeah.
there's no sidewalk out there to the edge, because there's hardly any sidewalk even
inside, yeah.
So this is a type of thing where it's a useful tool for a specific problem, which is pretty much not there. But you do things like get on Act 250, get Criteria 9L waived, you name it. And this is just an example up in St. Johnsbury of 4 units per acre. That's what 4 units per acre looks like. And again, this is our closer, I think. Yep, we have a list of a bunch of resources at the end there about what will work in your town and what are the issues in your town. And so try to make it not, we need housing. I like to talk about them as homes versus housing. We need some homes. We need some homes not for people who are gonna come here or whatever. We need some homes for these folks over here. And we need them because it ties to this economic development issue. We're trying to get this company's trying to start up and they can't hire engineers. Hypertherm's down there. Hypertherm has jobs open for engineers. They can't get engineers to develop because they can't get a house. Well, that's just silly, folks, right? So, if we have folks going around, well, we need to do stuff about economic development. We need to build houses. The #1 economic development issue in our region is to create more housing.
Yeah. Just like in cities, it's always schools.
Yeah, and then the second would be broadband and cell phone. But we have a little time for questions, then Ted's gonna talk. But any particular things in your towns that you're grappling with? I know Hartford's doing a lot right now. You got, it's not cranes, but we've got construction going on.
Right, and then we've got the housing going up on Sykes Mountain Avenue, the units there.
So how many all in all, Lori? How many, I can't remember how many units
Well,
are.
in downtown White River, within the last, say, 2 years, it's close to 100 units.
Yeah. And, when those are filled, those will be probably done this year, maybe, or next?
Well, if we took the up on Sykes Mountain Avenue, those were going in before the VCDP board, the housing for the Twin Pines and Housing Vermont, in the beginning of February, and they've got all the other funding secured, so.
But the ones downtown, when will
And
they
the
be
ones
finished?
downtown, the 17 units, those, the affordable ones, those will be this spring, they'll open up.
Yep.
And then we've got the assisted living, which will be done probably opening up in May.
Well, we're gonna have a
And that's
good
88
summer in White
units,
River,
so-
aren't we?
Yeah, you can
I
imagine.
mean, if you
Fun.
count those units, it's well over 100.
Right, and those
in the last
businesses,
12,
Tucker Box,
18,
all
12.
sorts of people are gonna feel it. When those have people in them, that's gonna move
So are
Yeah,
the people.
all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, the 88
Yeah,
units
see
of
each other.
assisted living it's not affordable in our category affordable, but it does meet a very key housing, type of housing need, which is the aging population. And a lot of those people in Norwich may be coming over. Who knows?
Well, I can name
But,
a number of people who've moved since I got that.
It really does fit that niche, and then we've got the 16 units of affordable housing at Bridge, Maine. We've got the 36 units of the house that was, cleaners that was converted into housing, which is a very small housing. Really, 18 of those units are actually serving the northern stage, and then 18 are at Straight Market. Then we've got the 22 units in what was the former Legion building, and those are again very small units. 2 of them are 1 bedroom, and the others are all efficiencies, and like 350 square feet kind of stuff. But full, always full. And then we've got the 6 units that are across from the Elixir there, and then we've got scattered ones in between. And then up on Sykes Mountain Avenue, we've got the Twin Pines, which is 24, 28, and then they'll have another 30 units with that on phase 2, and then we've got the 88 units for just over there from another developer. So,
So you're cooking.
we're cooking.
I think there was a really good graphic at, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, at the last housing,
The leadership.
the housing leadership workshop at the Fireside Inn. There's a good graphic of all the units that are being developed in Hartford and Lebanon.
Right.
Yeah,
so-
you and Lebanon have really taken up the majority of the.
Well, you guys can help. mean, I think,
Every town can do little bits.
right, and I think what's good is that we're getting a diversity of type, size, income.
Florida.
So, but it's
Absolutely.
challenging. I mean, one of the things that we're facing with the development on Sykes Mountain Avenue that's done by Twin Pines, and that's gonna be market rate housing combined with also affordable according to HUD.
Mhm.
But, you know, that's a great development, but the cost per unit in order to do that is not inexpensive.
No.
And I'm sure you've seen this in Burlington area that, you know, that's prime real estate. And we want it there because that's where your transportation systems are, you're walkable to a lot of different things, and we want
Yeah.
that. But that makes the land very,
That's the reason in
expensive, too.
Burlington, the inclusionary zoning ordinance helps some, you know, because even if you're building some housing in prime area, you still gotta put in at least 15, depends on where you are in the city, but at least 15% inclusionary units.
I mean, that's something we have to talk a little bit more about too. The accessory dwelling is a really good thing to get
Yeah.
going. You know, when that opened up and expanded and we took that on, we get a lot of that. And it's a great way for elderly to stay within their home or on their property, as well as just expanding the housing options
Tom?
in the rural areas, so.
Yeah, so Kevin, if you're trying to assess how a particular town is doing on some regulatory approach, has there been kind of a audit or a review that kind of gives an assessment of how particular towns are doing?
Yeah, we looked at all the towns in our region and actually Southern Windsor's, in those 40 town areas, about 4 or 5 years ago. And the regulations probably haven't changed very much in that time. And so we looked at things like lot size, minimum lot size. Are your lot sizes just too large?
Yep.
So especially if you've got sewer and water and you've got a half-acre lot size, that's too big.
Yeah.
For sewer and water.
So,
Parking requirements, another straightforward one. Setbacks,
Yeah.
usually the front setback was just too large. You know, why be that large?
so that's all written up in
Yep.
the report?
Yeah, it's in a kind of clunky Excel table, but we could spit it out town by town pretty fast, yeah. And again, for the towns out there, if you want to say, okay, you know, take a look at our zoning ordinance under the hood and, you know, give us the top 4 things you do with it. We can do that in a matter of hours. You know. It's the umpteen meetings that cost you a lot of times, but sitting down and reading the bylaw, which I understand regular people don't do, but we're immune to that, right, Laurie? We're good.
So, what would be your next step from this workshop?
I think we did a video a couple years ago, which was trying to break this cultural resistance to affordable housing, or housing that is affordable. I think the more we can try to maybe have some stock photos about density in our region, the more we can find the particular example. So much now in the planning field is around storytelling and narrative. So, say, okay, here's like a little white paper. Here's the happy person who sold the little lots, and the farm got conserved and some housing got built, or here's an adaptive reuse in a barn, or that type of thing. So it's hard for us to physically do a project, working at the regional level on the policy side. But I think if we can find stories and tell them.
So, the one thing that, and I appreciate everything you're doing because it's very valuable, but I'm also looking at what can we do to crack this nut? Because we have so much housing we have to create in such a limited period of time, and I will feel that, that we could have done maybe different things a little bit differently, and I'm thinking, like we did a weatherized challenge, maybe we need to do a housing challenge or something like, I don't know, start really getting into digging your hands and getting them dirty and start taking action, even in just a little way, and doing it with communities in the core areas, finding some pieces of property that we can focus and work on, and get some examples there in the flesh as opposed, over and above just having them in the video. I just feel like we've gotta start digging in on
Yeah.
this
Yeah, I mean,
production thing more.
to get kind of wild and crazy a little bit, the public money that we have is so small and getting smaller, it seems. And dealing with the rules around it is just so much of a pain, as you know.
It's
That it would be much better to kind of have some type of nonprofit housing developer. To me, that they're in the mission of building these houses. They do good jobs. You know, you can show them and go, "This is the thing we built over there in that town," and you do it as a business. You know, you don't lose money doing it. You just not in to make money, I think that would probably be the way to go, along with continued social pressure to do this, because, you know, people are like, oh yeah, you know, we got 10 units, and I'm like, well, that was nice, but that took a year. I want 10 units a week, folks.
Well, right, but it's also that the money issue is a big factor. I mean, I think about the projects that we've done and having, I mean, 2 or 3 years just lining up all the funding for it has been a
Oh,
challenge.
yeah, you know, you're trying to get $100,000
Right,
for
you
a
know,
$4 million
yeah.
project.
Right, and so I look at, we're trying to reformulate the Upper Valley Housing Coalition, and to me, one of the missed opportunities you might have had there was really doing the banking.
Yeah, if we had a large
And
capital upfront cost.
We need to really
It
get
could-
those.
to-
Land banking.
The
to
land
me,
banking,
it
we
would-
need
it would-
the land
it
banking,
would
we
roll.
need the money to do the
What is
development.
land banking?
Well,
Shit's
it's,
like-
well, the
Okay.
land banking is where you actually can say, all right, you go to Norwich or somebody in there, or there's a private property owner, and they say, okay, we're gonna develop land here, and because land is a big cost.
Yeah.
So you get people to commit the land, that can take right off the top of cost there. Then you, and then you can get, that's where the Upper Valley Housing Coalition can really work with it. It can be, you create that subdivision and you're clustering and one big, you know, create that opportunity with a private developer that they get something and you get something or whatever it is and you get to conserve. Because a lot of people in the rural areas are concerned about conserving lands.
Yeah.
So if you can create the shaping of it, and you've done that in Burlington. I mean, you've done the land banking around the waterfront, the whole stuff there.
Yeah,
where
it's kind
you've
of a land
actually-
trust, like
Well,
the.
It could be a land
very-
trust, it
yeah,
could be,
okay.
it doesn't have to be, but you
Yeah,
can do
yeah,
it
yeah,
that
That's
way.
the way to do it.
But it's really, a lot of it is a housing authority becomes the entity in which they can
Yes.
do that. And then another
Yeah.
piece that you can also look at is we've got to get the bank there. That literally a banking system where you
Yes.
can get in there, because it's so expensive and so arduous with the federal money, and it's just so little of it.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, and
and the
you're,
That's the
state,
thing about
and the
federal money
state
these days.
is doing the new housing bond, but, you know, it's all running through the same system. And we've gotta go beyond the public funds and really, Hypertherm knows that they can't hire people until they have the housing. There's lots of banks around here that have talked about this for years, but we've
Yeah.
never seen it.
yeah, I mean, and you know, you need a chunk, $50 million or something, capitalize it, go build them, turn that money over, because you sell the house, you put the money back in,
Right.
you sell.
Right.
But you need the initial snowball there, and you're right, you know, I'd love to work with Upper Valley Land Trust, when they are working with landowners to see, okay, you know, because in many of our towns, if we built 4 units, that's a big thing. As I tell in my town, I put a dormer on my house, and like, that was a big thing. You know, people were stopping in the road and talking about it, it's just a dormer. Didn't even have a room, right? But.
Almost.
Oh, yeah, I know. What are you doing? Okay, it passed the social test. But in other towns, you know, maybe it's gonna be 5, maybe it's gonna be 10. We have Cobb Hill down there, and, you know, we have, up in this part of the region, people worrying about New Vista, which is 20,000, you know. It's what they'd eventually love to do. But I say, but if somebody wanted to do Cobb Hill on one of these farms, would you be upset? And they're like, no. You know, okay. Well, how can we make that happen? 'Cause
There's
then-
a scale there that people can live with.
Yeah, there's very much a scale. And there's an example, because there they go, oh, you actually live at Cobb Hill. you know, and they're like, oh, well, Tom, you know, he's okay. And I bought their cheese, and, you know, and I drove past it and it was okay. And so, you know, it goes from being some concept in people's minds, it's just harebrained, to some physical examples, and then you go, oh, yeah, we can do that. Okay, Ted's up.
I'll say, just kind of taking off from where we just left off, in terms of making pictures that help people understand better the, what density really looks like. I don't know if any of you heard of a woman named Julie Campoli. She's well, she has a planning background, but she's kind of a, I'm not sure what you would call her. She does consultation all over the country. She's Vermont based, actually lives in Burlington. And she has done a lot of very good slideshows with Vermont, mostly, you know, 90% Vermont examples of here is density, and she calls it density done right. You know, if you look at this and see if this bothers you, and people say, no, that looks, and she says, well, that's denser than this, and she shows another picture that people say, well, that doesn't really look so good because it's, you know, it's not designed well, or, you know. Anyway, I just recommend Julie, if you know you get a chance to, you can find her on the internet, or I can give you contact information.
How do you spell her last name?
Campoli. Campoli, yeah. Anyway, just kind of explain why I'm even doing this kind of stuff as a director of a fair housing program. What my program does, and it is statewide, even though it's a part of a community action agency that's Northwest Vermont, Chittenden, Franklin, Grand Isle, and Addison. My program is one of three programs in the agency that are statewide. We do education and outreach. And most people know something about fair housing, and that is basically in 1968, the federal government passed the first real fair housing law in the country. It was a hard struggle getting there, and only passed after Martin Luther King was assassinated. 2 weeks later, it was signed into law. So it took that, all the riots and stuff that followed that, unfortunately, to make Congress wake up and say, yeah, we really do have a problem with extreme segregation and, you know, this developing of basically slums in the cities. Since then, the states passed some law, the federals added disabilities, a few other categories. But let me say legal aid and the Human Rights Commission do mostly, they focus on the actual acts of discrimination and trying to, you know, get some mediation or litigation, depending on what it has to go to, around individuals in certain protected classes under fair housing law, you know, some recourse. But even though they're funded by HUD for a different program, we're also funded by HUD, but we just do education outreach. And we focus on systemic issues and those kind of things we're talking about, the kind of bylaws that need some serious adjustment or whatever, that tend to create, let's say, negative opportunities for people in protected categories. For instance, people with disabilities. You know, it's the principle of disparate impact, and that is that people, and if you look at the whole group of classes, protected classes, there's a higher number of people in those categories that tend to be lower income. maybe not at the very bottom, but, you know, some of them are, but, so if, there are situations where, there's too much exclusivity in the whole, you know, zoning and, permitting process and all that, then there's a disparate negative impact on people in protected classes. So that's why we really focus on just stuff like this, on trying to provide education outreach about ways to create more opportunity for more affordable housing. And along with affordable housing is just housing, because we see a whole spectrum of need. Actually, this is we just got word last week that we had a new HUD grant approved for another year. And that was good news for us. And so we're gonna be working with, we have been working especially the last year and a half or so with, or more, with 3 regional planning commissions. These guys, Two Rivers folks, Lamoille County Regional Planning Commission, and Chittenden Regional Planning Commission. We're having on the 29th of this month, Chittenden Regional Planning Commission, along with my program, has a big, we have like 50 people signed up now to talk about economics of housing. And we have some private developers, some nonprofit developers, and I'm gonna say a few words. And, you know, I think it's gonna be really good, so it's pretty exciting. But, you know, you can, I handed out something that talks about what we do. I am excited now that so many people are recognizing how the lack of affordability and actually just lack of availability of housing is creating a roadblock for economic development. It's becoming talked about more and more. In lots of parts of the country, and especially in Vermont, the governor's talking about it. I think we have, because we have so much more awareness, including the business sector now, we have potential to really get some momentum going, you know, with some of these kind of things. And I've heard some great ideas here, just getting people, their minds working and sharing information is very important. I don't have too much more to say. I was just trying to give an overview of what we're about, and you know, that we would love to do, if anybody thinks that they know a group that might like us to come and do a presentation or just a group talk or whatever, we're happy to do that.
Nice. Oh, just to hearten you, there's a show 1A on NPR.
Yeah.
It goes on in the mornings, and the guy asked at the end of the show, well guys, you know, they were talking about the economy, what's the #1 thing holding back the American economy? And they all said, to a man, they said housing.
Yeah.
It's housing costs, because the corporations have tons of money, the banks have decent loan rates, everything's fine, except nobody can move, and nobody can live close enough to where they want. So that's the biggest inhibitor, according to a lot of experts, and that was said nationally today.
Yeah.
Just to
Absolutely.
give you some.
Yeah, and
So,
just
yeah.
like I mentioned before we really started, there was I haven't yet gone back and looked up so I can download as a blog, but the NPR report yesterday, day before, about the housing constraint on economic development, especially in rural areas, so it's very appropriate for our state. Anyway, are there any questions for me?
No, when is that Chittenden thing with the? I like the idea of of seeing the interaction between and the comments from not-for-profit developers and regular.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things you'll find, the nonprofit developers all tend to like Burlington's inclusionary zoning for the most part. The for-profit developers are, you know, some of them saying, well, I can't really.
Theoretically, it's great.
Yeah. But, you know,
Yeah.
Jane is actually heading up a ongoing committee of the city council and others.
So we need to, we were kind of evaluating our inclusionary zoning ordinance and looking at how do we, because it's like 30 years old or, you know, almost getting up there. And we have the for-profit developers and the non-profit developers and then some public sector people. And this is that, you know, because the developers always say, we just can't make the numbers work because our threshold right now is 4 or something, if you're building more than 4 units?
Yeah, 5.
5
More than
units,
5.
so that's pretty small, right?
Yeah, that's
And
too
so we're all
low,
kind of agree
really.
that you probably need to, that's probably inhibiting some
Yeah,
development, so we
some
wanna,
infill kind of stuff that we
wanna
want to
raise,
have.
we wanna raise the threshold, but then the question becomes, what's the right number?
Yeah.
So,
And
well,
who do you
okay,
ask?
At
What
when
that
do the
number
numbers
is.
start to work, you know, and then that's really hard getting at.
So
Of
what
course,
are you
every
looking-
project is a little different, so.
So what are you looking at to help you and inform you of what that right number is? What are the things that you're?
We're asking the developers and the nonprofit developers like to put together like sample pro formas for projects, like
Mhm.
give us an example of how all these numbers shake
Yeah,
out.
help us understand.
That would be interesting to look
Yeah.
at
Yeah,
what
yeah.
the nonprofit guys find acceptable margins and what the for-profit guys
Right.
find.
Yeah.
Because that's a
Right.
real look under the
Oh,
hood.
absolutely. I mean, it's great having them all sitting on that. on
And
that
one,
committee.
one thing that we did, they kind of like,
Looks good.
sometimes they kind of get a little bit of way. So, including a guy who's like a great constituent of mine, always votes for me, a great guy, does great stuff. And he says, you know, I can't make the numbers work with inclusionary zoning. And it's like, well, then why are you building?
He
But
keeps
you're still
building.
building,
He's
right?
a major.
And so it's like, well, it's actually because I know
Residential.
over time my rents are gonna rise.
Yeah.
So if I look at the lifetime of the project,
Yeah,
maybe it doesn't work in year 1, but by year 10, I'm looking good.
yeah.
So that's, you know,
That's actually,
So that's
That's
what I'm
what- yeah,
taking
that's
home
the
tonight. That's my
conversation, yeah.
take home from
Yeah.
this one. Because
Yeah.
I taught, we, in Norwich, we're always, we've been trying to get developers in and I
Yeah.
talk to them, I wanna figure this out. And
yeah,
my first question is gonna be, well, what's your
Yeah.
window when you analyze your
Yes.
profit and loss?
Well,
yeah,
a little word of warning that we all need to look out for how this is gonna play out, but, you know, I guess you all know one of the major sources of funding for affordable housing has been the tax credit.
Right.
oh, yes.
And with the new
Yeah.
tax stuff, because corporate taxes will be reduced so much, they will have much less incentive to invest in their capital in that kind of building.
And that's
So,
an obvious
Yeah.
thought.
yeah, we have to, I don't know how we're gonna deal with it, but it'll put a real crimp in, you know, the building affordable housing. It just means we have to work all the harder to find every way we can.
Right, and I think it points to what Kevin and others were saying, that it really needs to be about figuring out how to do some of that at the market.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I don't imagine there's gonna be more money coming out of Washington
Yeah.
anytime soon to build housing that's affordable.
yeah, no,
They gotta
you
do the
know,
roads first.
there'll be,
They gotta do the roads and schools first, please.
It's not on the list. It's
Yeah.
not on the list.
Right.
Yeah.
one of the things, at least, although some people try to, you know, knock it out every now and then, that's community development block grant money,
Yeah, that seems.
which is very valuable, but it has a pretty broad constituency. People,
Yep.
Republican mayors and governors and others who say, yeah, don't touch that, we
Block
like
grant's a
the
mantra
CDBG.
in certain
Yeah,
political
yeah,
circles.
Yeah, it's kind of a third rail almost, you know, to cut
But
that.
it's still so competitive, so.
It's competitive and,
Demand. Sometimes you have to go to the well 2 or 3 times before you even can get funded.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's true. I mean, there's a shortage of any kind of subsidies and mechanisms for making this work. So all the, you know, the nonprofit sector that's involved in developing housing in the state they have learned how to put together these incredibly complicated development, the financing for the developments that include many multiple sources. Often there'll be the Housing Conservation Board money is very important. There's usually tax credit, CDBG, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
And while we have to do that, to a certain extent, it's a distraction.
Yeah, it
Because
is.
it's not at the scale of the problem.
Right.
Right.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
To,
Absolutely.
1 to 100 of the number of units that we actually need. So to have so many folks having to spend so much time jumping through those hoops and lining up all that funding when to produce so few units.
Yeah, yeah.
It needs to be,
Yeah.
we need to be coming up with solutions
Well,
to
we-
scale the problem.
Right,
I'm
I
talking
mean,
to Zuckerberg, that's what I'm doing.
we are at least getting some substantial housing development in Burlington now with the lake front. It's private development along with the nonprofit Champlain Housing Trust and Cathedral Square that focuses mainly on the senior housing. But that'll be how many
Beautiful
units
place
there?
to live.
400 and
It's a
something.
ton,
It's
it's a
a
lot.
large number of,
We have almost 300
Yeah.
downtown.
yeah. So,
That's gonna be gorgeous.
Yeah.
Well, and our next opportunity at scale is to see whether Dartmouth Hitchcock might wanna, well, this isn't in Vermont, so
Well, but
it's, perhaps I shouldn't be talking.
well,
about
it can be useful.
But that article in the paper certainly.
Yeah, no,
What are they doing?
Well, the new CEO of, who just has come in, is very much aware that housing is a critical gap. I mean, they've got millions of dollars they're putting in every year to day nurses because there isn't housing for
Right.
them. And it's
Right.
costing them
Right.
a fortune, and she actually comes from a hospital where they were investing in housing, as people were talking
Built
about
them out.
earlier. So the
Yeah,
question
built them
is,
out.
the question is,
They can bank a lot of land for us.
they have a lot of land.
Right.
The
They can
old
just-
company town
Yeah,
comes
That's right.
back.
Well,
They can-
It's, I think they could put up, if they could put up 400 units tomorrow, they could fill it with nurses.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that would
Empty the
relieve,
roads,
Yeah.
that would just be so nice.
it would relieve a lot of the pressure.
Yeah.
So I think from that article in the paper, it sounds like there's some energy there.
So that's important, that some of these sources that we have never thought of perhaps can actually all of a sudden play a role in
Yeah, and go
generating
talk to
some
King
more
Arthur now, our biggest business, and say,
Yeah,
have you ever thought about that spot over there?